Good afternoon and welcome to this ElectroBIM webinar looking at the features in ElectroBIM 2.2.3. The main new feature in 2.2.3 is a new generate riser command. So we have here shown what we call a one-line diagram, which is generated from the top down. We have a new generate riser. So if we go here on the ribbon, we've got the generate one line and there's this new generate riser feature. So let's go to a new drafting view and take a look at what that looks like. Going to run generate riser, and that will take a moment to draft itself on the view for us. There's three terms that electricals use for what we're looking at here. There's single line diagram, there's one line diagram, and there's riser diagram. And they're kind of used a bit interchangeably by people. So the definitions that we have settled on for how we're talking about them in our software is single line diagram refers to all of the different ways you could do this. So our ribbon tab there is the single line. Then the one line is that drafting view that we were looking at before, that top-down view, just a tree of all the connections. And then the riser is what we're drawing here. This is the new feature where the locations in the vertical space are based upon their elevations in the building. So that's how we're differentiating between single line diagram, one line diagram, and riser diagram. And the new feature will generate a riser where it's taking the location of the devices in the 3D space in your model and then laying them out on the single line using that elevation. I will zoom out here, and that is what this electrical system looks like in a riser view. So we have a bunch of stuff down here on the first floor, and then items on the third and the fourth floor. And I think this is probably up on the roof in this building. So it's using the elevations in the building in that 3D model to locate the devices on the riser. And in both cases, the single line diagram that we used to have and in the new riser, the idea is that we do a drafting that's pretty good. It's going to get you 80% of the way. But from here, you're going to want to do adjustments on your own to get this drafted how you'd actually like it to look. We do pretty good, but it's never going to be perfect. And there's always going to be a little place for you to come back and just adjust what this looks like so that it's clean and having the information that you want. There are some new settings for what graphics are being used. So if we take a look at our project options, previously we had a generate section that has been renamed to generate one line. So this is all the settings that we used to have for the graphics that are being used when you do a one line. And now we have the new generate riser. So this way you can have different graphics depending on whether you're generating a one line or generating a riser. Some companies will use both depending on the type of project. So that way, if you can have the different graphics happening between them. So you can set that at the project level. You can also set it in the families as well. If I run highlight device, go find one of these families in our project. If we open up this family in Revit, we have the ElectroBIM family edit command. If we change this to a panel, we'll have options for the one line graphics, and we'll also have options for the riser graphics. So there's a set of graphics we can use when generating one line, set of graphics we can use when generating a riser, and those can be different. So you can set those at the family level. You can then also set the graphics for the instance. Once it's inserted, you actually can't edit it. So if I run instance edit, the graphics are already set because it's on the single line. So it's not going to let us change it here. You would want to go to the single line and change it. So in that case, I'm going to make a copy and we'll edit this one. We'll run instance edit, select that new one. And you can change the graphic that's going to be used here. It's a single graphic. The idea being that we don't need to specify for an instance a riser versus one line, because generally you do one or the other on a project. A specific project is going to use one or the other. So if you're changing the graphic, you just change it and it's going to be used for whatever generate you use for that instance. So those are the new settings that we have for controlling the graphics that are going to be used in that generate riser command. Then you'll notice that there are a lot of new commands up here on the ribbon. We expanded all of these and added more commands on this feeder section to help with the drafting of the riser or one-line diagram. Just because of how we draft this and because of how Revit works, it's a little bit cumbersome to use Revit's built-in drafting features to move stuff around. So we've added all of these just to make things work a little bit smoother. You don't have to use any of these commands for a lot of this, but it's going to make it work a little bit better. So I'm just going to walk through all of these different commands. The first one we have is this equipment move. If you just move a device using Revit, it'll move the device. It's not going to move the feeder. Then you have to move the feeder, and it's a bunch of work. If you run our equipment move, it will now drag that feeder along for you. So you select the piece of equipment, you give it the displacement, and then it'll move that piece of equipment and pull the feeder along. So it's not doing anything that you couldn't do manually. It's just going to be a little bit simpler, keeping things connected, moving things together nicely for you. Then we have the circuit insert. That's an existing command. It'll just put a new feeder on the single line for you. We've renamed these two commands. Previously, they were feeder redraw and feeder draw. And honestly, I can't tell you which was which because I could never keep them separate in my mind as to what they did. So we gave them new names. Feeder auto draw will automatically redraw the feeder for you. Feeder manual draw lets you manually draw what it should look like. So if we run feeder auto draw and we select this panel, it will insert it automatically for us based upon its best guess as the routing of the feeder. So it drew that automatically for us. And then feeder manual draw is if you want to have control over where that feeder is going. So if we want to go from here and say we want to have the feeder go off this way, we can do that. So the manual draw is for drawing it in manually. So that was just a renaming of those two commands. Those two commands have previously existed. They've just got new names. Feeder phase is another command that's existed. And just as a reminder of what that does, it just lets you take a feeder and change it. It's really changing the type here, but it will change the type for everything connected. Typically, that's for changing from new to existing. So we called it phase because it's kind of a phasing thing. But it's really just changing the type of everything on that feeder. The feeder swap is a new command. What this will do is it'll let you take two feeders and swap where they are relative to each other. I'm going to move this panel from here over to here. And so now we have these two feeders that are crossing over each other. The feeder swap will let you just swap where those are located so that they're not crossing like that. So if I do the feeder swap, I can take this feeder here and take this feeder here, and it'll swap them so that they're not overlapping anymore. So if you just want to rearrange your feeders, that's a helpful command for that. Next, we have the segment move. This is for moving feeder segments. So we have the equipment move for moving pieces of equipment. Segment move lets you move part of a feeder. So we can take this segment and then you specify where you want it to be located, just a single point, and it'll move it there. It'll keep the orientation the same. So it's not going to do anything with, so just move it so that's on that point that you selected. So that lets you move your pieces around a little bit easier. Say we wanted to move this one up. You just rearrange them without having to then adjust all the other pieces. Segment insert lets you add segments to the end of a feeder. So say we took this panel and we actually did want to move it so that it wasn't connected. So now we want to draft in the rest of these segments off of this line here. We can run segment insert, select this, and it's going to draw from this point, and we'll just go straight to the panel. And so now we have that piece being inserted. Segment break lets you add a break to an existing segment. Select the segment. We're going to break it at this point here. And select the point here, and then it'll move that portion of the segment up and break it and add another segment here. So that's for adding a break like that, adding some sort of little dog leg into the feeder that you already have. The segment offset will offset the pieces with our, we've kind of got a consistent offset between feeders, and this will account for that automatically. So you can run the segment offset. I want to offset things relative to this feeder. So this feeder is in the right spot, and I want to offset this feeder on this direction. So it'll just move it so that we've got consistent spacing. So you can use that to get the spacing between your feeders consistent. Then the segment align, make a quick adjustment here so that that will make more sense. I'm going to move this panel down here, and I'm going to move this segment. So we've got a feeder going up and then a feeder going down, and they're kind of offset. If we run the align, it'll put these two pieces in line with each other is what this command's for. So you can run segment align. This one's in the right spot, move this one in line with it, and it'll just pull it over so that they're in line with each other like that. Then segment trim and extend. This existed previously. but if you do actually move pieces and then they become disconnected, you can use this to get those segments to connect to each other. You can, manually pull them, but it's a little bit tedious to do that. You can select this segment, and it'll make that connection for you. Finally, segment delete will get rid of a section and kind of heal the whole thing for you if you don't want to have that section in there anymore. So if I run segment delete, select this segment, it'll make a nice right angle for us. And so those are all of the new commands that we added. So you can use these to help with the locations of your feeder tags. So when we do the generate riser, you can see here, we've got the feeder tags kind of on top of each other. And that's just how that's going to happen. When I said it's going to make something that, is 80% correct, it's going to be things like this, where it's not seeing that this feeder tag is overlapping these others. And you'd probably want to move things around to account for that. The specific commands we're looking at don't help with that. But in this case, you'd want to use graphic move. You can select this ID here and move it to that location, and then do the same thing with these other ones. That's just the reality of using the generate riser. It does a pretty good job, but it's not going to be perfect, and you'll want to go back and clean things up like that. So it's a cleaner drawing than it generates. In something like this, you don't actually need to move where the feeder segment they're on. You just need to move them around a little bit so they're not on top of each other. We did update a number of graphics for the single line diagram. We provide families for you that you can use. You can replace them with your own. We did have to modify our graphics to make them work a little bit better with the generate. So what you have, if you're using the old stuff, will work fine. There's some cases where you might end up with some feeders that are offset a little bit farther than they should be. On the release notes, we have a list of all the files that we have updated. So you could manually copy those over from our default customization to your customization, or completely replace your customization with those files. So just be aware, if you're using our out-of-the-box customization, there's a couple graphics that we've updated. And if you're just using our out-of-the-box stuff, you can override it with what we've got. All of our customization is stored in your program files. So if we go to program files, Design Master Software, Electrical RT, customization, this is our default set of files. So you can take these and copy them to where you have your specific customization. And you can find your customization by going to User Options, and it'll tell you here where your files are being stored. If you want to, you can click Open, and that will open that folder for you to make the copy and paste easy from one folder to another. So in 2.2.2, we implemented metric units in our software and using the units that you specify in your project. We missed Arc Flash, so we've added that in 2.2.3. If you're doing Arc Flash, all of the settings down here are going to reflect your metric versus imperial settings. Previously, these were all stuck in imperial. So those will acknowledge your metric setting. And finally, I do want to mention that we are going to be dropping support for the AutoCAD export in Revit 2026. This command lets you export all the information to AutoCAD and then draft your single line diagram there. That's how we used to do it before our 2.0 release. And there's a number of customers who are still using this because we were missing some features, largely this generate riser feature. So now that we have generate riser and all of these other feeder commands in Revit, the need for AutoCAD is no longer there. So we are going to be dropping the ability to export in Revit 2026, or whatever they call the next version of Revit, presumably 2026. So we'll keep that in the current version and older versions. So if you do use that feature and you want to keep using it to finish those projects, you can. Be aware, for future projects, you do need to start using our single line diagrams in Revit.